It is the fifth model introduced in the 2024 Rockman X Collaboration, the iconic antagonist and driving force of every Rockman X game ever since the beginning. It is RMX04 Fixer Sigma, with a kit of Precognition, Hypervirus, Perfect Guard, Biped Legs, and the leg ability of Confront, which buffs all leg stats, minus armor and heavy limit, if targeting an opponent with more charge percentage filled than the user. Now, it was very obvious from the very beginning, even without having to look at the trailer video that announced the collaboration. If you're going to see Rockman X anywhere, it's going to be very obvious that Sigma is going to be somewhere close behind. You can't have one without the other, and it's honestly not a full collaboration or a complete one without including everyone's favorite host of the Sigma virus and the primary antagonist of every Rockman X game since their beginning, especially donning the original look he had from the original X1. Precognition on the head part is a support-based skill that, once activated, will apply 3 random buffs across the entirety of the team. These buffs can range from anything from shoot boost to conceal, even to things like stat cleanse or guard boost, or even stat cleanse, like I mentioned, or even guard boost or anything else of the like. So it has a much wider array of skills it has at its disposal compared to Hypercrep, which only grants 2 random buffs and a much smaller pool. Of course, at the cost that you only have 2 uses of that. And it has also been noted that Precognition also tends to not last as long as most other standard buffs might. So a word of caution on this as well. It's great for stacking a lot of buffs at once, and because you can stack multiple, you can use this more than once to kind of re-roll for the boost that you want across the team. Hypervirus on the right arm is a brand new skill being introduced in the game, but not quite new in the terms of what it brings to the table. To put it simply, Hypervirus is just standard virus, which is your standard turn-skipping attack if you catch them in their heat phase, but it also applies pierce damage and much higher base power to this particular attack. Of course, at the cost that when using this attack, you are slapped with a no dodge and no defend penalty on cooldown. So a little bit of caution is advised there for that higher power. Its heat stat actually isn't bad though, so you do have a pretty fair chance of outrunning targets pretty easily with a very high heat at 809. And its success at 1201 is also really good too, as it means that Sigma's really not going to have an issue with people trying to dodge or get around him. Perfect Guard on the left arm, and the first ever instance of this particular skill that is not on a head, is a defense-based skill that, as long as Sigma remains planted on the line, allows him to tank 2 blows at 0 damage completely in place of himself or allies. This will nullify all hits to 0, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, which makes it a fantastic shield that you can use in basically any kind of situation, in contrast to, say, Guard 300 or 500, Melee or Shoot Guard, or even the counters in particular, where you still end up taking something in particular for this. Perfect Guard nulls it down to 0, period, end of story. However, because it is not a meta change type shield, it is also weak and susceptible to anyone that uses Destroy or Slip or even catches him early with Deathlock. So do bear some caution in mind as well with this one, as it means that while he is on the line, he will guard against most stuff pretty easily. But if the enemy brings certain types of skills, it will spell doom for him relatively quickly. Biped legs means that he'll have pretty solid coverage across most terrains, and his leg stats across the board are pretty solid even before modifiers. With a base mobility of 869, he's already starting off on a good foot with some very solid base speed. An evade of 782 isn't too shabby, but he really isn't going to be focusing too heavily on dodging or grazing a lot. But a melee resist of 612 and a shoot resist of 1518 are definitely going to be strong points for him, as this means that he can most certainly hold his own up close and personal or at range, as rather fitting based on his bouts against both X and Zero through the course of the Rockman X series, with relatively little difficulty. And that's not even touching on the leg ability of Confront. Now, granted, the leg ability of Confront is a little more niche than, say, most other boosted leg stat modifiers or leg abilities might be. But in the right hands, this can be a very powerful ability as well, as the more often that you attack a target, their Metaforce gauge will go up, and as long as they have a higher charge gauge than you, you already have an advantage for higher power or higher leg stats and higher likelihood of keeping damage on the low, as long as you can keep yours lower than theirs. Across the board as well, Sigma is pretty tanky as well, with armor at about 4319 for the head, also 4319 for that right arm, and about 4560 for the left arm as well, and legs also at 4560. So relatively well-rounded armor there as well, pretty healthy HP pool, and pretty tanky. So it's going to be a little tricky to take this source of the Sigma virus down rather sooner than later. All this being said though, as a pure set score, I still do have to rate Fixer Sigma a pretty solid and well-rounded 7 out of 10. Given that he is a pretty well-rounded type between a support skill, a melee skill, and a defense skill, he can fit a lot of roles relatively easily. And even if you choose not to use Hypervirus for the ailment that it does inflict, such as if the enemy has stat cleanse on the enemy side or something similar, its power is still solid enough that you can use it as a conventional skill relatively easily with no real drawback. Of course, though, you do have to bear in mind that no dodge and no defend penalty on cooldown, so just make sure that somebody is either covering Sigma or he can finish his cooldown faster than the enemy can finish their heat phase and counter him. Plus, with a perfect guard on the left arm, it does round him out with a very wide array of what he can do. From supporting, to combat, to even defense as well, you can use him in a lot of different situations with no real drawback or drop or fall in his performance. As mixed parts, I do have to rate him just a little bit higher at a 7.5 out of 10. Primarily for the reason that even though Precognition and Hypervirus really aren't a whole lot of, say, new things that you could bring to the table, the Perfect Guard left arm and biped legs with Confront are also going to be very solid things that you really can't go wrong with. Confront can be fixed relatively easily, depending on how you decide to go with your Metaphor Sustain. In contrast to many other types of models that tend to focus on needing it, Sigma's a model that specializes in having lower CG or even none at all in some cases, in contrast, so that he could have the higher speed bonus and advantage against all other enemies that do. So he basically serves, in this case, ironically, as a perfect counter to Hunter X, who is the free reward and specializes in Metaphor Sustain and Full Charge. And Perfect Guard on the left arm, I really don't need to say much more about that, because it speaks for itself how useful that can be, having it on an arm that can be used basically indefinitely as long as it remains on the field. The only real warning I am going to give you with Fixer Sigma as well is the fact that he is packing 2 heavy parts. Of course, you can't get away with a Perfect Guard arm without some kind of drawback. So do bear in mind and be a little cautious of anyone on the enemy team that packs a gravity skill of any kind, whether it be Break or Break Hammer or anything of the like. That most certainly will cut Sigma down to size as a rather notable weakness as long as he remains on the field.